So we are on lecture 21. We're going to wrap up the economic and climate shocks discussion and the discussion of instrumental variables, and then transition into discussing corruption, culture, and underdevelopment. And again, just a reminder, there's been a slight switch in the lecture schedule where we're going to swap one of the papers we were going to do on lecture 25 into section, and then on that same time and date, there's this SIGA symposium, which I urge all of you to register for and attend, because it'll be very much in line with what we're learning in the course. Okay, any questions before I get started? Also, problem set 3 will be posted tonight and due in a week. 1 week. Okay, so let's just go back to where we left off. We were discussing instrumental variables. I want to take a few minutes and just recap, get up to speed with where we were, and then finish the discussion of this rainfall instrument and talk about one more instrumental variable application before we transition on to culture. So remember, we talked about the 3 conditions that need to hold if we're going to use an instrumental variables approach. We talked about relevance, in other words, having an instrument that actually has some predictive power in driving what we would call the endogenous variable. We need exogeneity, meaning that the instrument is not itself affected by the outcome or by all the other omitted variables that we're concerned with. And finally, we need the exclusion restriction to hold, and the exclusion restriction is the point that this instrumental variable only affects the outcome of interest acting through the channel that we've modeled, the channel that we have data on. So those are the 3 conditions in words, and then of course, there have been these already copyrighted figures, unique figures, that convey the same point in other ways. The first one is the bold rainfall growth, in this case, affects economic growth. That's the relevance point. Exogeneity is the point that conflict outcomes on the ground do not affect rainfall patterns. That's the nice thing about weather. It's not going to be too affected by those things. Nor do our omitted variables X affect rainfall growth. So those are the 2 conditions there, the 2 points. And the third is exclusion restriction, which is, for this to be a valid instrument, we need rainfall growth to affect conflict only working through economic growth and not through other channels. Now, in the last lecture, we talked about a lot of these potential other channels and why they may be a concern or may not be a concern. And that kind of discussion, if you're going to use instrumental variables methods, you have to have that discussion with yourself and others. When you're in a seminar, when you're discussing something to policymakers, when you're presenting results in any form using instrumental variables, everybody's going to spend all their time trying to be as creative as they can to come up with the wackiest possible alternative channel. So it's better if you've thought about it first. So you can say, I thought of that. Good point. You may be right. And then you move on. Okay, so what about in equations? And we already discussed this, but again, just to recap, there are 3 regression equations that go into instrumental variables estimation. One is the first stage we already discussed, so the regression of economic growth on rainfall growth here. The second is the reduced form, the regression of the outcome of interest directly on the instrument. And then finally is what's called the second stage equation, or what people call sometimes the structural equation, that captures really the relationship you're most interested in, the reason why you're going to instrumental variables in the first place. I'm not going to go into details. We went through all these slides at the end of lecture last time, but just jumping forward, we went through and discussed the reasoning behind why B2 in the previous regression, the coefficient estimate of interest, in this case the coefficient estimate on economic growth, can be thought of as the ratio of the reduced form coefficient estimate over the first stage coefficient estimate. And again, the idea is if there is an instrument that's driving variation in this case economic growth, we can exploit that exogenous variation to understand the relationship between growth and some outcome. So we talked about that intuition. We also derived algebraically where the IV estimate comes from. I think it's still worth doing this again, which is if you want to sort of capture this ratio of B0 over B1, you can focus on the second stage regression and plug in the first stage relationship. In other words, impose that economic growth, or variation in economic growth that we're looking at, is driven by the instrumental variable. I mean, that's what the first stage is. So if we impose that relationship in the second stage, we get the reduced form. That's what comes out. And the coefficient estimate on the instrument in the reduced form is just B2 times B1. Now remember, in the reduced form, the coefficient estimate on rainfall growth is B0. So what we get out of this very simple algebraic exercise is B2 times B1 equals B0, and that delivers the ratio that we want again. And I think there's a number of different ways to derive that ratio, but this is a particularly transparent way, and the sort of plugging in of the first stage has content. I mean, it's telling you, look, I'm focusing on the variation in economic growth driven by this instrument. That's the relationship that I'm taking advantage of. Okay, this is all recap from last time. So we talked about this. Okay, so what's new? Let me pause for a second before getting to the magnitude. Any questions on this conceptually, or are you guys sick of hearing about this already? A few more minutes. So let's talk about the magnitudes. When we go through this procedure to come up with IV estimates in this paper, what we get is an IV coefficient estimate on economic growth of about minus 2.5. Okay, what does that mean? Now again, that's derived from B0 divided by B1, basically. That's what you get. Is this a large effect or a small effect? To think about that, in this context, we have to think about the types of shocks we're interested in. So imagine I ask myself the question, will a large economic growth shock, a negative economic growth shock, lead to a large or a small increase in the likelihood of civil war in this sample, in sub-Saharan Africa in the 1980s and 90s? So what's a large economic growth shock? If you look at African income data or know something about macro patterns, a minus 5% growth shock in a given year is a big growth shock. That's a really big recession. So let's start with that and say, if we have a big recession, what kind of sort of effect would we expect to see on the risk of civil war? So what we have to do to come up with that magnitude is multiply minus 5, this big shock, times the coefficient estimate, which is the coefficient estimate on economic growth, and we get something like 12%. So 12%. What does that mean? It's really 12 percentage points. What does that mean? To understand the magnitude, we can look at the average rate of conflict in our data set. So again, in this African sample in the 80s and 90s, in 27% of country year observations, there is civil conflict. That's a lot, as we talked about before. 12 percentage points is about 40% of that, about 30% of the mean conflict rate. So in other words, a large recession would increase the conflict risk by about 40% of the mean. That's a lot. That's a big magnitude. Even if you only had a 2% growth shock, so a minor recession or moderate recession, that would increase the risk of civil conflict by 2 times minus 2.5, or 5 percentage points. 5 over 27 is still pretty big. So these are pretty big magnitudes, and that's how people interpret these results. Let me pause for a second, see if there's any questions about this sort of verbal exercise I'm going through, which again is just the fact that we care about B2, but B2 is a coefficient estimate on economic growth for country I in year T. So if we want to know the overall effect of this term, now we have an estimate of B2, we can do different thought experiments about how big the growth shock is to come up with these magnitudes. Make sense? I think this is straightforward. Okay, I want to turn to another application of IV. And this is going to go back to a paper we discussed a few weeks ago, the Thornton paper on cash incentives for people to retrieve their HIV test results in Malawi. So remember again, that paper basically shows that when you pay people small amounts of money, they're much more likely to get their test results. And then there's a separate sort of analysis in the paper on changes in risky sexual behavior. And in particular, they capture these changes in risky sexual behavior by getting at people's willingness to pay for condoms. So you can imagine your willingness to pay for condoms to capture your willingness to avoid risky sex. So let's talk through this paper using some data that's sort of similar to the paper, but some stuff that we're just going to adopt for convenience, because this is more of a thought exercise, and ask the following question. Can we go through an IV-type thought experiment with this project, walking through from the experiment, the cash incentive, to knowledge about one's HIV status, all the way through to risky sexual behavior? Okay, so what's the IV here? Anybody? The cash incentive. So the cash incentive is the IV that's going to lead to a change, an exogenous change, in your knowledge of your HIV status, hopefully. And the fact that this was actually administered as a randomized experiment helps, because again, you can't make the case, as long as the randomization was done properly, you can't make the case that it's in any way correlated with risky sexual behavior because it's just random. So exogeneity is typically the last of our problems when we have experiments. We may have other problems, as we'll talk about, but that isn't going to be the main problem. So let's talk through how this would work. Here's what the three estimation equations would look like. Again, the three that go into IV. Excuse me. There's the second stage, and this is the one we really care about. So in IV estimation, the second stage is what we care about. We care about how knowing your HIV status affects risky sexual behavior. That's what we want to understand, let's say. The first stage relationship regresses my knowledge of my HIV status on the incentive, which is the instrument. And I'm using all the same notations of the previous example with B's and E's, the same subscripts, just so you can compare them more easily. And then finally, the reduced form is the regression of risky sexual behavior directly on the incentive. So the Thornton paper really focuses, if you think of this project in this way, really focuses on the first stage of this overall causal chain. Are we actually even just getting people more information by incentivizing them? And then she has some suggested evidence on behavior, but again, only limited outcomes actually. It isn't really as much the focus of that project. Okay, let me pause for a second if there's any questions about the setup here. Okay, so start thinking through those three conditions. Relevance, exogeneity, exclusion restriction. Which of those three channels, given what you know about Thornton, is likely to be of greatest concern if we're going to use this in an IV framework? Relevance, exogeneity, exclusion. Is relevance a big issue here, or not so much? Why not? Exactly. So Thornton's whole paper says you give people tiny bits of money, and they get their information. You increase the likelihood they're going to get the information by this huge effect. So her paper is all about saying, wow, we have a really strong first stage. Is exogeneity a concern if we're going to use the incentive as an IV? I just said it wasn't, right? Because if you have a randomized experiment, it's not going to be correlated with all this other stuff if it was properly implemented. What about exclusion? Is exclusion likely to be a concern here or not? Oops, and that is going to bring us to the clicker question. Sorry, I didn't run this thing. Okay. So, clicker question. In your view, which of the following is most likely to be the most important violation of the exclusion restriction, if any? Okay, maybe it's not an issue. Is it the effect of cash incentives on people's attitudes towards the healthcare system? Have they kind of learned that the healthcare system is this great system that pays you to do good stuff, and that's going to kind of change their behavior in some way? A. B. Is there going to be some effect, not just of the cash incentive in this experiment, but of the fact that trained health personnel visit you to give you the cash? Is that a different channel that's going to matter here? C. Are people's intrinsic motivation to do the right thing in terms of health behavior going to be affected by giving them cash? In other words, are they going to learn you only do the right thing if you get paid to do it? D. Could there be spillovers of some kind to the control group? And what would those look like? And then E. There's just too many violations. This is fatally flawed. My brain is overloaded. There's a few people that have answered E, so relax. Don't get overloaded. Okay, let's take like another 20 or 30. Let's go till 2 minutes, and please speak with your neighbor if you want to discuss any of these points in particular for another 30 seconds. Okay, click in, click in. Okay, so very interesting. There's a big spread here. There's a lot of A's. So a number of you have answered that you think that attitudes toward the healthcare system could change, A. And people are most concerned about B and C, the effect that health personnel visiting you could affect you, independent of the cash incentive. Or C, your intrinsic motivation could change. And then a fair number of people answered D, about basically effects on the control group. And then there's a lot of E's. Can someone who answered D explain a channel that they think is interesting or potentially important with a spillover onto the control group?
We found that like women engaged in consensual sex, have more risky manner when they were exposed to economic shocks. The fact that they didn't have incentive, they have easily known about economic shock that would prevent positive behavior.
Exactly. So if the cash incentives are large enough that there's like something like an income effect, then that could affect behavior. Women who are poor and vulnerable are more likely to engage in those behaviors. So it's not information alone, but there could be, well, it's a different type of exclusion restriction violation. Yeah, so that's a very good one. Yep.
The other issue is that Thornton paper just defines risky or safe sex behavior as defined unincentive.
Yep.
You give somebody that's A affecting C. You give somebody a cash incentive just for showing up, and then you say, by the way, you have cash. Like, my that's A affecting C, and that's in my mind that's taking B out of it.
Mm-hmm. So, so again, it's sort of like cash in hand has an effect, even not just operating through information. What other violations might you think of there? One way to think about D that's interesting and sort of requires another step is imagine there's a local market for, it could be transactional sex, and we talked about that, that's a non-trivial issue, but even independent of transactional sex, there are people who are looking for sexual partners. Now, all of a sudden, because of this program, there's a group of people who are less willing to engage in risky sex. That's going to affect other people who didn't know their status or didn't get the incentive. So there's a village with a certain number of people, some of whom have behavioral change. So that's going to affect other people who might have had them as sexual partners. So there's sort of a new equilibrium in the market due to this program. Even if only the treatment group's behavior is directly affected, there's this spillover on others who might want to have them as sexual partners. So then it becomes, people are kind of getting what I'm getting at? Everybody's smiling. Yeah, okay. So you see what I'm getting at. Great. Any other comments or thoughts on this? Okay. Good. So let's get back to this. Is the exclusion restriction plausible? And it sounds like you guys have doubts, and this is the norm with any instrumental variable approach. There are stories. There are theoretical approaches and models that point towards violation of exclusion restrictions. And the key thing you have to do if you're going to use this kind of approach is understand what the 2 or 3 leading potential violations are, and try to get data to head them off, basically. And so in this case, if we are concerned about the income effect story, we have to come up with some estimate of how risky sexual behavior is affected by income levels from some other data source to get a sense of whether these are large enough to explain any effects that we found, for instance. Now that may be a difficult thing to do, but that's the kind of thing we would need to do. I will say that despite all these concerns, you can go into a seminar using the IV in this paper. You could defend these channels. You'd have to bring some additional data, but I think people would be willing to suspend, to put some of the doubts aside to see what these estimates look like, as long as you can do some credible job of ruling out some of the alternative channels. Just to give you a sense of the kind of standards people would have for research. All the points you guys made would be things that would be very valid to make in a research talk or when discussing results with policymakers, but people would find the IV at least somewhat credible here, as long as the cash incentives aren't too large. I think once you get to the point that the cash incentives are really big, then it's hard to say there is no income effect. So long as they're small. So for instance, remember Thornton had this case where you could give people only 30 or 50 cents, and you still shift the behavior a lot in terms of retrieving results. That would be pretty good. That would, the income effects there are probably small. If you give people $10, $20, a large amount of money, maybe not. But the case where you had 30 cents, probably the income effects are small. So that would be the kind of argument Rebecca would be making in a seminar or to discuss these results. Okay, so again, going through the exact same intuition we had before, we come up with a 2-stage IV estimate, that is the reduced form coefficient estimate divided by the first stage estimate. So I'm going to make up some numbers that are vaguely related to a paper just to get round numbers, and let's go through what they would imply if we believe the IV assumption. So imagine in the first stage, and this is broadly similar to what you find, imagine giving cash incentives increases retrieval of the HIV test results from 30% to 80%. Okay, so a proportion, in terms of proportion, it's 0.5. So a big first stage. And imagine in the reduced form, getting the cash incentive reduces risky sexual behavior, which you could define here as not purchasing the condoms, from 50% to 40%. So an effect of minus 0.1. What is the IV estimate? Just going through the ratio we just did before. Just shout it out. You guys are very shy today. Under the assumption we buy the IV, we'll talk about why that may not hold. Minus 0.2, did somebody say? Yeah, so minus 0.2, you get the minus 0.1 divided by half, and you get the IV estimate, okay? So 20 percentage points. So what this is saying, if you believe these numbers and these assumptions, is if I know my HIV status, the shift in risky sexual behavior would be 20 percentage points. And again, remember in her paper, she found effects among HIV positive people, but not HIV negative people, so I'm kind of abstracting away from that for clarity. But if these were the estimates in some subgroup, that's what the IV estimate would look like. Okay. What is the intuition? And this is something I want you guys to take away from this. These kinds of designs, these IV designs are typically called encouragement designs in fieldwork. An encouragement design is one in which some sort of incentive, social pressure, piece of information, bribe, whatever it is offered to people to try to get them to take out a treatment. So here the treatment is knowing your HIV status, and there's a cash incentive. So this is an encouragement to get people to retrieve their HIV status. These are very widely used. They're widely used in academic studies. They're increasingly widely used in very applied settings. I mean, this is a tool that even if one were doing a field project that one wasn't planning to publish, just one wanted to understand the impact of a policy or program, you could use this. You could come up with some incentive to get people to adopt, or in this case, get information. Okay, so the intuition is going to be important to explain this to others. So what is the intuition? Remember, the change in retrieval of HIV status was 0.5. So 50% of the population, an additional 50% got information when they were encouraged with an incentive. The way to understand the IV estimate under the IV assumptions is the total effect that we see in the reduced form is concentrated among those who retrieved their HIV status. That's true under the IV assumption of the exclusion restriction holding. If the exclusion restriction doesn't hold, then even people, say, who got cash but never went to go retrieve their test, or people who were visited by a health worker but never went to go get their test, they could be seeing gains from the program or effects of the program. Under the IV assumptions, all the effect of the program is working through knowing your HIV status. So that's the intuition and encouragement design, and this is intuition that's useful when you look at a broad range of IV studies. Under the IV assumptions, the whole effect is concentrated in that 0.5 of the population that got their HIV status. So another way to think of the IV estimate is say, look, we know the reduced form effect is minus 0.1. Where does that come from? It's driven by the 0.5 of the population that has some effect, the people that got their HIV status, and 0 times the other 0.5, because under the IV assumptions, they're not gaining at all. So this also gives you your minus 0.2. You basically divide the minus 0.1 by 0.5. This is another way to derive the ratio of the Wald estimator that now we've derived a couple different ways. But this intuition, I think, is very useful. Let me pause for a second. Okay. Now let's step back and talk about another project we studied. Think about the deworming study. Could we use an IV approach similar to this to capture the effect of treatment on those who actually took the deworming drugs in treatment school? So think of, now let's shift gears to a very closely related but subtly different example. Now imagine the IV as being a treatment school in the deworming project. And the variable we care about, the real structural equation, is what's the effect of actually taking the drugs. Could we use this same IV approach to get at the treatment effect on those who were actually treated, using the assignment of your school to deworming as an instrument? So remember, not everybody took the drugs. Like 3/4 of the kids took the drugs. So the first stage would be like 0.75. Can we do that or not? Yeah, Tom.